Hello, hello, hello. It's Therapist Thursday. Come on in the room. Come on in the room when you get here. Like and share so we can get this party started. Super excited for our Thursday time together, per usual. I am sharing it to my page. And then we're going to get this party started. How's y'all day today? Be sure to let me know you're in the room. Drop it in the comments so I can see who's here. But yeah, I hope you guys have had an amazing week. I know kids are about to get out of school, or people are already out of school, preparing for the summer. So it's an exciting time of the year. But we still want to get into these mental health topics because they're still important, and we're still in Mental Health Awareness Month. So the show is not going to stop over here. So you can still expect me every Thursday for Therapist Thursday. So we're going to get into it. And so be sure that you guys are still submitting your questions. Okay, so we're kind of coming up on the end of the pool of questions that we've had. And so be sure that you're sending your questions, submitting them on the KiaraJBrand.com website. It's going to be a message box at the bottom right corner. Just submit your questions so it's anonymous. I have them. And so I can prepare for those questions for our next Therapist Thursday sessions. Okay? Again, also, if you have been following us or if you just kind of getting in with us and you want to kind of go back and see what we've been talking about, be sure to go to our YouTube. And of course, you can always go to Facebook. But if you want everything in one place, more simplified, go to our YouTube, the Kiara J channel, so you can catch up on all of our episodes. Hello, hello. Hey, Miss Tamika and Miss Leela. Thanks for hopping in on the chat. So glad you guys are here today. So today, our topic is triggers. So the question that we got for today is, how do you control your emotions from certain triggers that you cannot control? And I thought this was a very, very, very good question because we all have those things that kind of come up for us when certain stimuli, certain things kind of arise that make us remember past experiences and that produces a response out of us. And so I thought this was a great, great question. And so drop in the chat what you feel like a trigger is, or as you've kind of been on your growth progress, or process rather, what are some triggers you've had to kind of identify and kind of work through as you get started. So when we think of a trigger, so this is something that brings on a worsening symptom. It's usually a stressor of some sort. It's an action or situation that can lead to adverse emotional reactions or responses, right? So these things vary from person to person again because it's going to be based off of those past experiences that are tailored to the person, right? So for instance, this can look like physical symptoms, whether it's heavy breathing, sweating, things of that nature. These responses can, affect our thinking. So we may feel attacked. We may feel like we're being controlled of some sort. We may be feeling like we're being blamed for something, depending on what the trigger is. So it can affect our thoughts, right? It can also bring about certain feelings or sensations in the body. So we may feel overwhelmed, we may feel unloved, or things of that nature. We may not feel heard, and these things are triggering for us. And so when we are experiencing these triggers, it impairs our judgment in the moment, right? Because if we're gonna be honest, sometimes when we're encountering said triggers, we may not always be what's the word I want to use, looking at the situation for what it really is because of said triggers and certain stimuli that is connected to past experiences. But it may not be the case in said scenario, but we're perceiving it as such. And so it definitely impairs judgment and we lack insight in the moment. granted, after the fact, we could probably identify like, okay, that wasn't a threat or that wasn't going to cause any harm, but in the moment, we still have that response. And so, of course, these things can cause extreme discomfort. Sometimes it can even, produce conflict in your relationships. Um, Certain triggers can cause illness, worsening of symptoms. Some people experience episodes. It can even go as far as hospitalization, depending on the severity of said triggers and how that shows up for that particular person in their body, right? And so we can have external triggers. So these can be like fears that are being magnified, whether it could be natural disasters. So, like for us down south, we experience like tornadoes and things like that. That could be a thing. Hurricanes. Those could be external triggers. Wars. There's a lot of things going on in the world. So being exposed to those type of things. So media, the news, social media, all these things can kind of be some external triggers for us. We can have internal triggers, so negative feelings that threaten your safety. And I'm pretty sure for the most of us, this is the area that kind of gets us the most. So these internal triggers, things that are threatening our safety. Um, and so let's see in the chat. We have one, so that is one of my triggers, weather, and I'm working on absolutely. Because, we're just gonna be honest, these things can be a little scary, and so yes, internal triggers. So feelings, feelings that are threatening your safety. So this can look like abandonment, abuse, violence, etc. So these are some internal things that we can be kind of struggling with. And then we also have what we would say trauma triggers. So these could be places, people, things that remind us of a traumatic experience or event. Okay. And so we also have symptom triggers. And so for some of us, and of course for everybody, if we're not taking care of ourselves properly, then we can also kind of produce these symptom triggers such as lack of sleep, poor diet, increased heart rate, sweaty palms, tension, sadness. These things can also be triggers for us. Um, and so kind of moving forward, thinking about ways that we can cope with these things. So again, we can have external triggers, things coming from the outside world, those internal triggers that's usually coming against or threatening our safety. We have trauma triggers, so people, places, things that are reminding us of traumatic events or experiences, or symptom triggers, so things that could be exhibiting based on just poor self-care. And so for those of us that are in the chat, I guess what would be some ways or what have been some things that you have either tried or have worked for you when it comes to controlling your emotions when these triggers come about? I'm excited to see what's been working for you all as we kind of dive into some ways that you can kind of combat or cope with these said triggers. Okay. So first we gotta learn to identify, again, kind of what we were saying earlier, our perception. So we gotta learn how to identify what's actually going on, right? And so who and what is going on, right? So when you had this emotional experience to say trigger, like what was going on, let's assess the situation. Who was there, what happened, who was involved, where it took place, any particular patterns, signs of risk or threat. So that way, moving forward, we can kind of figure out, okay, what are these things that we can look for, that we can identify, so we'll know to kind of go into prevention mode to kind of listen to these things and prevent ourselves from being triggered and having an overly emotional response in those moments, right? Um, Make a plan to address said triggers, right? So that's either talking to a loved one or someone that can assist you with, reducing these symptoms. Um, and then of course, usually this is taking place with people that we're probably in close relationship with. And so this is a great place to kind of have a conversation like, hey, this is what happened. This is what was going on when I was triggered this way. Can we kind of have a conversation about it? Can I kind of explain why I'm feeling this way, what it reminded me of? And so we can kind of get a clear understanding of what's happening for you and what happened for you in those moments. Um, and especially if it's something that's repeatedly happening. For instance, like if you're in a romantic relationship, you have a spouse, maybe it's a certain word that they say, or it's how they deal with their own conflict that may be threatening to your safety due to past experiences that you've had. Especially if it's something repeatedly, it's definitely something you should communicate about it regardless. But especially if it's something that's repeatedly happening, definitely look into it and have a conversation about it. Let's see. So let's see. I keep my distance. Okay, that will work. That will work. Hello, hello. Welcome to the chat. So yes, that can definitely work. Okay. And so again, confronting the stressor directly. So find a solution to the stressor. And so y'all know here over here we're all about resourcing, right? And so if you're realizing like, okay, hey, I'm having a hard time, I'm easily triggered, or I seem to always find myself being triggered by certain things, and I'm having a hard time to cope, of course, reach out to your resources. Phone a friend, find a therapist, a counselor, someone who you can, in a safe space, kind of go through these things and identify why you're feeling this way or why you're having triggers towards certain situations. Because you may not be aware wholeheartedly what's actually going on for you. Let's see, Miss Leela said she starts reciting Philippians 4:16. Awesome. Come on. Now, my believers in the room, we always got the word, right? That should be like our main resource, our main tool and tactic when coping with stressors or triggers and things like that. So I love that. And so, one of the main coping strategies that we'll typically run to would be what we would consider emotional or emotion focused coping. And this is where kind of goes back to the question, like, this is what you would do if you can't control or eliminate the things that's causing the stressors, right? And so we're going to try to reduce symptoms as soon as possible. So that could be deep breathing. There's something you can always do in a moment, whether it's meditation, communicating to a person if they're the one that's causing the trigger. And so that way we can clear up any misunderstanding. Always have open communication and understanding. And then, of course, setting boundaries moving forward. And so, especially if you're being triggered by a person, of course, communication, identifying any misunderstandings, and determining how you guys move forward with proper boundaries in place. So definitely want to do that. We already mentioned finding a therapist. And the main thing that I want to focus on today is checking our thoughts. Right? So since we've been kind of having our run-on conversation the past couple of weeks, we know that our thoughts are very, 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 very important. Right? Um, if first starts with your thoughts and then your body follows, right? And so, if we're honest, our thoughts is probably kind of driving some of these fears or triggers that we have, and some of the thoughts that we're having, it's not necessarily our fault, because a lot of things that have what we want to say scarred us or impacted us in such a way, a lot of those things we really didn't have control of, right? When we think about how we grew up, a lot of those things we couldn't control. When we think about natural disasters and traumatic events and things like that, a lot of those things we could not control. And so we're not saying that it's your fault that we've kind of developed these things over time, but we can do something in the interim, which is control our thoughts, right? And our responses to said things. And so when these triggers come about, we gotta start checking our thoughts. Okay. And so we want to fact check. And so in our world, we call this putting our thoughts on trial. And so when said situations come about, we need to look into it and say, like, okay, well, do I have any evidence that I'm at risk of being harmed right now? Do I have any evidence that something bad is about to happen? Usually we do not have a lot of evidence to support that. And so it's kind of like giving you this process that you can do in your mind to kind of take a breath, take a beat. Let's really think about the thoughts that we're having, and then scanning the environment to see, do we have any evidence currently that something bad is about to happen. Even though this said trigger is reminding you of something of the past, but right now, do we have anything that's saying like, hey, something bad is going to happen? You should run for safety, right? So we want to put our thoughts on trial. Um, and then want to kind of identify if we have any kind of cognitive distortions, right? And so these are just faulty or inaccurate thinking or perceptions or beliefs that we may have. And so, because sometimes we can overgeneralize things, or we can make things bigger than what they are. And so that's something else we need to kind of look for. And then we also want to reframe. And so this is just reshaping our automatic negative thoughts about said triggers with more positive ones. And so, of course, this takes time, this takes practice, this takes repetition. But I feel like the biggest thing when it comes to trigger is our thought process behind it, right? And then you usually see these things when it comes to dealing with people in close relationship. And so really assessing like, okay, the person that I'm involved with, the person that I'm talking to, the nature of the person, the characteristic of the person, is this outside of their character? So you can kind of combat these negative thoughts, because a lot of times, again, we don't have evidence for said things going badly, right? And then reflecting on, okay, is my response appropriate for what just happened? Again, going back to, overgeneralizing. Sometimes our response to, the trigger is not appropriate for the instance that just took place. And so I think that's another way we can kind of really identify, like, okay, well, I know I just had that response, but this situation didn't really call for that response. Let me take a step back. So that's something that you can look for. And then just being intentional about, again, what we are exposing ourselves to. And so especially when it comes to media, let's be aware of, trigger warnings. Which I feel like social media does a better thing, better tactics with that now, asking, do you want to view this, give you a warning about certain things, because there might be some things you just don't want to be exposed to or don't need to be exposed to, that are just not helpful for you. And so always checking the warning labels, checking for content. And then also, if you know that, you are still trying to process through certain triggers or certain past trauma, again, being intentional about what you're exposing yourself to. So that's music, that's media, that's TV, there's conversations that you could be having, just making sure that you're stewarding your gates. So that's your eyes, your ears, your mouth, all these things. Just making sure that you're only exposing yourself to things that are helpful to you, right? And always practice self-care, because a lot of times we can also still be triggered because our life in general just seems overwhelmed, right? Everything is heightened. We're burnt out. We're stressed out. It's just a lot of things going on. And so a lot of things, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, can be resolved with, of course, addressing our thoughts and then making sure that we have self-care in place, right? Because when things seem, uncontrollable, or, we're having overly emotional responses to things, it's probably because we are out of alignment in some area of our life, right? And so we definitely need to address those areas. So of course, you can always journal. Like, okay, you had this triggering experience. Maybe it wasn't with a person that I can kind of talk about it with. So I'm gonna go home and kind of write it out and identify what happened. Again, going back to the who, what, when, why. What did it remind me of? What was my response? And how can I go about responding better in the future when something like this happens again? Of course, deep breathing, meditation. Of course, going to therapy, making sure we're addressing our physical health, because again, all this works together. So making sure that we are sleeping, eating, moving, addressing all of those concerns. And then for some of us, as we've already identified, making sure that even on a spiritual level, that we are sound, and we're building ourselves up in that area as well. And so these are things that you can do when you feel like you can't control your emotions from certain triggers that are uncontrollable. So in a nutshell, it boils down to our thoughts. It boils down to our thoughts and controlling the things that we can control. So when things seems all out of whack, When it feels like you can't get in your footing, just take a step back and focus on the things that you can control, which what I would call our basics, right? Go back to the basics. Go back to the basics. And if you find yourself being easily triggered, again, in relationships, in certain situations, it may be time for you to seek out a thought partner, which will be a therapist or a counselor. So we can kind of peel back those layers to see where did it start and why we're responding in said ways. Okay, and so that's what I have for you all. Drop it in the chat. Is there anything else that you guys have found helpful? Um, Aside of just, of course, addressing your thoughts, going back to the basics, making sure we have our priorities in place. Anything else that is helpful when we think about dealing with triggers that we've had, or we can even talk about, okay, what it looks like when we don't kind of go through that process of addressing our thoughts, responding properly, and I guess what that could look like from a negative standpoint. And I guess what did we learn from that situation? But you guys have definitely said some good things in the chat. We had a good audience today. Y'all stayed in here with me, so I'm so excited. But if you guys don't have anything else, this was some good nuggets. Shout out to you. Thank you. Thank you. And so that's why we're here. We're just trying to, drop the nuggets, give you something to work with as you're, continuing your journey. Until you're ready to, come into the room, come into the office, so we can really, kind of dive in and unpack those layers. But this is why we're here. And so we just want to be a community where we can provide resource and some information and direction so we can all be our best selves. So that's all we're trying to do. And so I appreciate you guys, coming every Thursday in the room. Well, awesome. Good stuff. I'm glad that this is becoming helpful for you all again. And so if you guys find this information helpful, I want you guys to help me out. I want you to share this on your pages or with someone who you may feel like need this information. Sharing is caring. We've always heard that, but it really is. And that's why, we can use social media for good. Sharing good information, things that people may find useful. And so let's like and share this. Again, follow our YouTube page if you want to see all of our past episodes in one place. That's the Kiara J channel. Follow us. Again, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we're doing things all throughout the month to just engage and spread the information and education around mental health, because it is very, very important, and we should take it serious as such. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, share it. Be sure to submit your questions so we can, continue our conversation next week. But that's all I got for y'all. We enjoyed you as well. And so you guys have an amazing rest of your week. It's Mother's Day this weekend. Love on your mothers. We adore them. We love them. Show them some love, whether it's your, biological mother, someone who raised you, whatever. This weekend is all about the mothers. So let's shower them, let's love them, and show them how much we appreciate them this weekend. And so we will see you guys next week. Oh, shameless plug. So tonight, I'm doing a live tonight on Facebook, Black Women in Mental Health. And so please come back. I'll share the video on my page, of course. But we're going to be having a conversation around mental health with some other great, great therapists in the city of Mobile. And so I'm super excited about it. So, hey, join us tonight for another conversation around, Black women and mental health. You don't want to miss it. We got some great questions that we're going to be addressing. So meet us back here tonight at 6:30.